When I saw this article about Liberty University coming out this week, the first thing I thought of is there's a connection between Liberty University, which is one of the, maybe the second largest Christian university in the country, mostly due to its online base, and the Department of Education, which just fined them a ton of stuff, a ton of money. And this is the article I want to show you because this is dated. Look at the date on this. This is from the Associated Press, November 18th, 2016. And just look at the headline here. This is right after the 2016 election. Trump had won. And now the question was, all right, who's his cabinet going to be? Liberty University President Jerry Falwell Jr. has confirmed that he visited with President elect Donald Trump in New York City. Falwell tells local media that he and Trump met Thursday at Trump Tower to discuss the U.S. Department of Education and Falwell's potential role. And it goes on to say he wouldn't confirm or deny whether he was being vetted as Secretary of Education, but says he will definitely play a role in the administration. I mean, can you imagine if Jerry Falwell Jr. became Secretary of Education? That would be, it's not worse than what they ended up going with, which was Betsy DeVos, but that's how tight Jerry Falwell and Liberty University were with the Trump administration. Jerry Falwell Jr., of course, gave Trump a big endorsement during his campaign, letting white evangelicals know that it's okay to vote for this guy. But I thought about that because I know it's funny to talk about Jerry Falwell Jr. and all the scandals that were associated with him. But the reason that stood out to me is because this week, the Department of Education fined Liberty University a record $14 million for violating something called the Clery Act. In essence, the government said Liberty University created a culture where students were afraid to report sexual violence, and they didn't do enough to let students know about active threats on campus. And that's why this is so disturbing. This is the headline from the U.S. Department of Education's website. U.S. Department of Education imposes $14 million fine against Liberty for Clery Act violations. That's, I think, almost 3 times as much as anything else in the past. And actually, Liberty should be really grateful about this because back in like October, when this when it was first understood that, oh, Liberty's in some trouble here, this was the headline from the Christian Post. Liberty University threatened with $37.5 million fine over alleged Clery Act violations. So it actually came down to 14 in the course of several months. Basically, the Department of Education said, you've made a lot of mistakes. Here's our report. And if we go through with fining you what we think you should be fined, it could be $37.5 million. But Liberty University could then go back and say, okay, but we have responses to everything you're accusing us of. And then the Department of Education took that into account and lowered it to 14. But let's talk about what some of these allegations are because, and I'll go into depth about what it's all about. But the thing that you need to see more than anything else, maybe you're wondering, why is Liberty University, why is the Department of Education even allowed to do something like this? Doesn't that seem messed up? And the reason that the government can go after a private Christian school like this is because Liberty University gets hundreds of millions of dollars each year from the federal government for student loans. Like if you're a student who wants to go to Liberty University, let me show you this right here. This is from this report. And you could see this in 2022, 2023, like the most recent school year. This is how much money Liberty University got from the federal government. It's a total of almost $880 million worth of student loans in all these different ways. Like Liberty University could not function unless students were taking out student loans to give to the school. So the thing is, if the government is going to give Liberty University all this money in order to help students pay for their college education, They can't tell Liberty University, like, not to be Christian, but they can do some basic things and hold Liberty University accountable for certain secular things that Liberty promised to do. And that's why we're in this whole mess in the first place, okay? So, by the way, that $880 million that the Department of Education gives to the school, that helps approximately 67% of the students on campus. So, like, Liberty could not function without the government's help, right? So Liberty has already agreed to pay this money, the $14 million. Plus, they said they would spend an additional $2 million over the next 2 years to fix all these problems on campus. And this is the statement. Uh, Liberty University put out a statement here, basically saying, yeah, we'll do everything you want us to do because we want to keep this money rolling in. I want to show you this quotation from someone the Washington Post spoke to. This is in the Washington Post. This is the single most blistering Clery report I have ever read, ever, said a campus safety consultant. Like, that's how bad this thing is. And if you think about it, if Liberty University is taking in $880 million a year from the government, then paying $14 million and change to say, all right, we screwed up, we will fix our problems, that's pocket change to them at this point, and we'll get into that more later. Okay. So, anyway, let me get into this. The school, back in October, when the government said, here's our draft of the report, this is all the mistakes you're making, Liberty University initially put out a statement here, university statement on U.S. Department of Education's Clery Act program review. And this is from the school's president. They accuse the government of, like, being unfair to them. I know this is hard to read, but look at this. We found this report detailing significant errors, misstatements, and unsupported conclusions in the department's preliminary findings. So right off the bat, they're like, you're making everything up. This is persecution of us. It's not fair. How dare you? But after they put out the final report this week, it's kind of damning. And the reason that the US government even began investigating all this is there were a lot of articles that started coming out saying students were not safe on campus. This is from ProPublica. It's an amazing article that is really disturbing. The Liberty Way, how Liberty University discourages and dismisses students' reports of sexual assaults. This article was published when? In October of 2021. And you could see the subtitle here. The school founded by evangelist Jerry Falwell ignored reports of rape and threatened to punish accusers for breaking its moral code, say former students. An official who says he was fired for raising concerns calls it a conspiracy of silence. Like, that's just one example of how badly this school was doing the bare minimum to keep students safe. And just to mention what that article was talking about, consider this scenario. You're a student at Liberty University. Let's say you're a young woman, and hey, your friends are having a party on campus or maybe off campus. Someone has an apartment. Let's say there's alcohol at the party. Let's say you have a little too much to drink, and then you get sexually assaulted at the end of that night. Now, at any decent college, you could then, at the very least, try to report what happened to you to school officials, saying, this is what happened at the party. This is who I believe did it. Maybe they can collect evidence. Maybe there are some consequences. Who knows? But at Liberty, if a young woman went to the school officials and said, I was at a party, I got drunk, some guy sexually assaulted me, basically what a lot of women said in that ProPublica article is that Liberty came after them, the victims, because the young women violated school rules. Because Liberty would say, oh, you were at a party with young men? That's not okay. Oh, you drank alcohol? That violates campus policies. And even if they were sexually assaulted, the response would basically be, well, what were you wearing? You know what I mean? And so like a lot of young women, and it's not just at Liberty, this is the case at a lot of Christian schools across the country, fundamentalist Christian schools. They would say they don't feel comfortable going to school officials and telling them what happened to them. They didn't feel safe doing it because there was a good chance it would come back to bite them in the ass. They could be expelled for what happened to them. And that's the result of the school's very strict rules about what you're allowed to do. And any type of sex, obviously, is forbidden. Drinking is forbidden. So if you're at a party and you got drunk and you had sex, even if it was not consensual, you could get in trouble for that. Liberty seemed to punish female victims of sexual assault far more harshly than they ever seemed to punish the male perpetrators. That's kind of what that article was suggesting. In 2021, 12 women even sued Liberty University, claiming that officials there, and I'm quoting here, intentionally created a campus environment where sexual assaults and rapes are foreseeably more likely to occur than they would in the absence of Liberty's policies. That's how disturbing this was. And the thing is, because Liberty is guided by the Bible, they say, it's not like those rules were going to change. Women on campus were always going to be at risk. This was not a problem the school was going to fix on its own. That's why, under the Biden administration, the Department of Education began investigating Liberty University because they actually cared about helping students. Last October, they put out their preliminary report, and that was the way the headlines came about, like $37.5 million fine, potentially. Liberty had a chance to rebut everything that was said in there. And they're like, this is persecution. This week, the final report from the government was issued. And they said, here's our report. Liberty has already seen this and they agree to what we are saying in here because they've signed off on it. They agree to pay the $14 million fine. And that's the thing I want to discuss with you all because this report is damning. Let me make sure I can share this with you here. Let me pull up the actual report. Okay. This is gonna take a little while, but let's see. You could see my gazillion tabs over here, but let me see if I can make this work. Of course it's not working. I'm sorry. I'm gonna make this work somehow. Did it work? There we go. Okay. You could see at the top of this thing, this is dated March 5th. It's to the current president of Liberty University, Dondi Costin. And this is their final paper. And I'm going to scroll down to kind of where it gets to the main thing. This is the final program review determination. And look at this. Findings and final determination. There are 11, maybe 12 things that the government says here there are problems on campus, and they detail all 12 of these things. We're going to go through them. And I know this sounds like I'm going to read you a 100-page document. I won't read the whole thing, but this is a big freaking deal. They found 11. I know it says 12 there. They found 11 serious problems at Liberty. And they outlined all of them in here. We're going to go through a lot of this, okay? Because you need to understand just how bad this was. So, finding number one was a lack of administrative capability. Basically, Liberty University, the government said, failed to comply with sexual violence prevention requirements. They failed to let people on campus know when there were significant threats nearby, and they failed to send out emergency notifications about dangerous situations. I'm going to scroll down here to look at this. During this time, when they were reviewing the school, the Clery compliance officer also regularly presented recommendations for enhancements of policies, procedures, programs, and systems, most of which were rejected or ignored by senior management. Like, they had someone at school whose job it was to make sure the Clery Act is followed. What is the Clery Act? It's basically the rules that say if we're giving you money for student loans, you got to keep kids safe on campus. And Liberty had someone whose job it was to make sure the law was being followed. And that person said, they're not listening to me at all. So that's disturbing, right? So that's the first thing that even the person whose job it was to follow the law said, no one at this school is listening to me. My suggestions are repeatedly rejected or ignored. This goes on for a while because they say this is what the problem was. This is what y'all did. Um, and oh my God, this goes on for a while. Here's what you have to do, your required action. Liberty is required to take all necessary remedial actions. This is what the school said in response. This is what we determined. Okay, whatever. I'm going to move on to the next thing here. Number 2, inaccurate and incomplete informational disclosures. Okay, Liberty, they said, failed to complete and publish statements about campus safety and crime prevention policy. Like they did not tell students about like crime that was happening in the area. Why? Maybe because they kept touting themselves as one of the safest schools in the country. And if you keep telling people what the crimes are, maybe they won't believe you anymore. Apparently, and I want to show you one thing on here. This was shocking to me. Look at this. The concerns about Liberty's missing, there's a missing student notification. What if a student goes missing on campus? Look at this. The concerns about Liberty's missing student notification procedures are heightened due to the fact that the Department of Education became aware of approximately 40 reports of students who went missing for some period of time between 2016 and present day. 40 students went missing for some significant length of time, and Liberty didn't issue any alerts about them. And the footnote here, it says, not all of these reported cases necessarily required a notification, but the fact that you didn't do anything for these 40 kids, like that should be troubling, right? Like, listen, maybe some kid broke the rules. Maybe some young boy or girl, man, woman, they're 18. They went to go stay at their boyfriend or girlfriend's house, their apartment somewhere. That would break Liberty's rules. But if that kid disappeared from campus, for all we know, that kid was, I mean, I know they're not kids, but maybe they got kidnapped. Maybe they got abducted. Maybe something bad happened to them and we should all be looking for some body somewhere. But Liberty didn't send out notifications that someone was missing in any of those cases. That's just one example of how Liberty was not completing informational disclosures to people on campus. Why? Again, maybe it's because they wanted to maintain their reputation as a safe place. So that was number 2. That was the second finding from the Department of Education. Number 3, failure to comply with Violence Against Women Act requirements. Liberty did not tell alleged victims of sexual violence about their rights or their options. And there's one thing here I wanted to show you in this section. Here we go. Like, if a student says, I've been sexually assaulted, maybe we want to tell you, here's what you should do when it comes to like birth control. Here's what you should do in terms of STI testing. Here's who you should talk to, maybe a therapist. That's in addition to talking to law enforcement and all of that. And a lot of people said, the school never told us this is what we should do. And look at this section right here that's highlighted. In the face of these difficulties, several of these officials, by which they mean the people on campus whose job it was to handle these types of reports, they volunteered to create materials for the university, often on their own time, using their own resources. They're saying, we would love to hand you a pamphlet that tells you what your rights are and what you should do right now, but the school doesn't have any of that. So we went home, got on Microsoft Word and typed up our own. Like they made their own on their own time because the school wasn't helping out. And what happened when they said, we made these pamphlets, can we hand these to students? Their offers were rejected by senior leadership. Multiple staff members reported in their interviews with the Department of Education that this was true even after they advised leadership that the deficiencies in the operation were causing Liberty University to violate the law and that these failures could result in enforcement action. Like, these people on campus are trying to help these young women. And they're like, hey, we need to be able to give them information about how they should handle being a victim of sexual assault, what their rights are, all of that. The school says, yeah, no, we don't need to do that. Then these staffers are like, well, we made some brochures. Can we hand those out? Because you need to, because otherwise you're going to be breaking the law. And the school's like, now we good. Oh my God. Furthermore, this thing says, this, what else was in here? Oh my God. Okay, we're going to get to that in a second. There's another thing in here that talks about the Liberty Way. Here we go. There's this section. Sorry, it's not highlighted. There were RAs, like dorm room leaders, whose job was enforcing the Liberty Way. And what is the Liberty Way? Basically, that's the school's rule book that says you can't break the following rules. Well, according to a lot of students on campus, the rules that were in the Liberty Way made it less likely students would report crimes out of fear that they would be punished for contributing to their own assaults. And in one case, let me show you what an example of this was. You got to read this. This is insane. As one example, the review team calls attention to a particular incident. Yeah, it has a number and all that. In this case, a victim reported that she was raped. The victim stated that in furtherance of the attack, the perpetrator slapped her, pulled her hair, and threatened her by reminding her that he carried a knife. Oh my goodness, that is horrifying. The perpetrator also engaged in coercive, intimidating, and manipulative behaviors. Despite these reported facts, the investigator unfounded this case, basically not taking it seriously, based on a claim that the quote, victim indicates that she consented to the sexual act. In point of fact, the victim's own statement merely indicated that she gave in an attempt to get away from the perpetrator. Let me paraphrase that. This victim told school officials this guy came after me with a weapon, and because I didn't want to get hurt, I gave in to him, hoping that he isn't going to hurt me any further. And what does Liberty University say? They say, well, you gave in. And so it was consensual, so it was an assault. So we're going to take this little report you wrote up and we're going to rip it up and just pretend like it never happened. And the department says here at the end of this highlighted bit, to state the obvious, consent acquired by threat or force is no consent at all. Obviously. Horrific situation. Look at how Liberty handled that case. It's horrifying. But this is what students had to deal with. This is why they said later in this document, where was it here? Was it here? Did I miss it? Yeah, I'm gonna somewhere in this section. Sorry, I'm not reading the whole thing here. There were students who said, quote, they would have been better off if they had not reported these crimes in the first place. So that is how Liberty failed to comply with the Violence Against Women Act requirements. That was number 3. Let's go to number 4. Failure to identify, here we go. Failure to identify and notify campus security authorities and to establish an adequate system for collecting crime statistics from all required sources. Basically, whenever there's a crime on campus, someone on campus, the law enforcement on campus, they're supposed to keep a list of everything bad that happened. They're supposed to publish it so everyone can see, like, oh, this is what crime happened on campus. I mean, that's a way to stay informed. It's a way to make sure you're not doing anything that could put you in harm's way, right? Well, according to this report, the school did not collect this data, not in the right way anyway. They did not publish it so that students could know what was happening in their own community. And because of that, it created a more dangerous environment on campus. And there was a section I think I highlighted here. Look at this. Although the effect of Liberty's systemic failure to collect crime reports cannot be reliably quantified, it is abundantly clear that it caused Liberty's crime statistics to be substantially and systemically underreported. Of course, if you're not going to report what crimes are happening, it makes your crime numbers seem really low. Again, why would Liberty do this? Is it because they don't care about their students? I mean, indirectly, yes, but it's probably because they wanted to maintain their reputation as a school where crime doesn't happen. Because we're all good Christians here. Nothing bad ever happens when you're in a godly place. The school, according to this report, also said the school failed to tell security officials about their obligations in order to abide by the Clery Act. Like it was the school's responsibility to tell campus security personnel, here's what you got to keep track of, here's where you got to publish it. That's your job. But Liberty University did not tell those police officers on campus, this is part of your job and you got to do this thing. So, like, it's not even their fault. The school didn't tell them they needed to do that. So that's disturbing. Oh, this goes on for a while, you guys. Look at this too. Self-reported crimes. You could see this. Like in the year 2016, guess how many crimes happened in the various parts of Liberty? Total 0. There was no crime in 2016 when Jerry Falwell was there. Then in 2017, Falwell's still there, but they start keeping track of a few more things. And the numbers go up here and there. But in 2022, when they actually know, oh, the Department of Ed is investigating us, we should start trying to keep track of some of this stuff. Look at how fast those crime numbers go up. It goes from like 336 to 649 in a year. That's messed up. Okay, I'm going to jump down to the next thing over here. Where are we? Number 5, failure to properly classify and disclose crime statistics. So some of this piggybacks off of what I said earlier, but Liberty just didn't compile or publish data about on-campus crime, like I said, and that includes sexual violence, and they didn't do this for many years. And in some cases, specific crimes that happen on campus, you're supposed to say, this is what type of crime occurred. And in some cases, they just put some really specific crimes in the other category where they didn't need to be classified. It's like a catch-all term where you don't know what happened. So instead of saying a sexual violence occurred, they just said something occurred. Who knows what it could be? And they're not allowed to do that. In some cases, I think this is highlighted on here. Look at this. So this is what I was just saying. Classification errors included the improper use of non-criminal classifications, such as all other offenses. Like, you can't just put crimes in the other category and try to sweep them under the rug. Not okay. Look at this. In fact, the university's audit trail information identified at least 44 incidents for which no documentation could be found, and the institution apparently believes that those incidents should be removed from the statistical compilations as a result. Like, they totally swept those under the rug, and now no one knows what happened. Like, what the hell? That's messed up. There was one other thing I wanted to show you in this section, if I can find it. Sorry, it's a 108-page document. There's a lot to go through. Maybe I did. Here we go. Based on a review of this information, the department determined Liberty failed to disclose 165 crimes. There's just no information about them, even though we know something happened. The school didn't have the documentation for it. That's how badly they handled keeping track of the bad stuff happening on campus. So that was number 5. Let's move on to number 6. Failure to issue emergency notifications in accordance with federal regulations. Liberty did not send out emergency notifications to students. No cell phone alerts or anything, even when there were threats on campus, including, and I got to quote this here. Where did it go? I want to show you this. Boom. The Department of Education further found Liberty did not issue emergency notifications even after officials were notified and the nature of the condition had been reasonably confirmed. This lack of notifications occurred for on-campus incidents of credible bomb threats and gas leaks. There were bomb threats and gas leaks on campus, and the school needed to say, hey, kids, you should maybe not go to building 5 because there might be a bomb exploding. No, they just didn't say anything about them. What the hell? In 2016, this report says, I don't know if no, we'll get to that in a second. In 2016, according to this report, there was an on-campus bomb threat and an emergency alert was sent across campus. Like everyone got a little text alert that said, guys, don't go around. There's a bomb threat. But because it generated bad publicity, I think it made headlines in local news like Liberty, bomb threat. Because it generated bad publicity, senior officials at Liberty took steps to make sure similar notifications, and I'm quoting here, did not become a common occurrence even when they were justified. And at least one officer who sent out that bomb threat alert was subjected to disciplinary action for doing so. They punished the dude who was trying to keep kids safe. But that's not even the worst example of not telling kids about a threat on campus. Here's the worst example of it. Check this out. One individual whose campus presence posed such a danger to the Liberty campus involved a former football player who attended the university from 2018 to 2022. That football player had been accused of multiple sex crimes dating back to at least 2020. And they outline the details here. Look at this. Here's this criminal conduct. 2020, he was accused of rape. 2021, he was accused of stalking a girl at the school, and it continued for several months. In 2022, there's a no contact order. Hey, football player, you can't contact that woman. But he continued to stalk the girl, the woman. Then he was arrested for stalking in 2022. And what is happening while all this is going on? The football player was permitted to continue playing and practicing with the football team. No alert was sent out to the campus that, hey, there's a guy who's accused of some really heinous stuff. He has been, like, law enforcement has gotten involved here. He's on campus right now. You should avoid him. There was no alert sent out to students at all about him. And that's disturbing. And here's a different example. Oh, this is the same player. Despite the football player's history of sexual violence, there's no evidence that university officials ever considered alerting the campus about the threat to the campus community. Furthermore, there's no evidence that the university made significant effort to limit his access to campus facilities. Rather, from 2020 to 2022, the football player was allowed to come onto campus and access all football facilities. Oh my God. Oh my God. Sports ball. Jesus. Here's another example that I wanted to share with you before we moved on. There was a different incident. I'm going to back up here. Different incident, different student. But basically in 2018, there was a 14-year-old girl who was enrolled in a summer youth camp on Liberty's campus. And she said she was assaulted by an older man in what police called an attempted abduction. That happened to a 14-year-old girl. What should Liberty have done? They should have told everyone on campus, hey, this is like an alert. There was a 14-year-old, like, there was an attempted abduction. Like, don't go anywhere by yourselves, kids. Make sure there's a trusted adult with you at all time. Nope, no notification was sent out. Even though law enforcement officials were taking the matter seriously, Liberty University officials were not. And by the way, they didn't send this out even though the 14-year-old girl was part of some summer youth program, which means there were probably other 14-year-old girls on campus at the same time. That's disturbing. Look at this right here. Although no warnings were issued to the campus community, the Liberty University Police Department was concerned enough about this continuing dangerous condition to issue a bolo, be on the lookout, to all officers, advising them that a young girl was grabbed but was able to fight off the suspect and flee to a safe location. They called it an attempted abduction. So the police were taking this seriously. Good for them. But Liberty University didn't care enough about this to tell everyone on campus, there might be a bad guy around here. We need to watch out for him. Stay safe. That was number 6. You see how bad this is all getting? Let's jump to number 7. Oh, by the way, this involved a campus person as well. I know I'm rushed. I'm skipping through a lot of important stuff here just so I can get to all of this. Um, and that section was a large one. Number 7, failure to issue timely warnings in accordance with federal regulations. Liberty, like I said, they were supposed to tell students and employees about ongoing threats. They chose not to. Between 2016 and 2021, despite there being, where's the number here? 284 Clery reportable crimes. Like, we know there were serious crimes, 284 of them. During this time, Liberty University only issued one timely warning, and it wasn't even good enough. Basically, there was one case that included a robbery and assault and battery of a student, but other students were not notified that that happened. So they weren't taking care of this. Here's another example, lower stakes, but this is fascinating here. At one point, from October 2022 to January 2023, 9 incidences of on-campus motorized scooter thefts occurred. People have their bikes, they lock them up, and they were being stolen. 9 of them were stolen, not all at once, like one was stolen, then maybe another 2 were snatched. At some point, you would think, hey, you know what? There's like a motorized scooter thief somewhere on campus. You would think after like number 2 or number 3, the school would say, hey, maybe double lock up your bikes or maybe don't use your bikes for a while because someone's stealing them all. Nope. They didn't say anything until after theft number 9. And look at this. Had the university issued a timely warning weeks earlier upon realization that there was an ongoing and serious threat of having one's scooter stolen on campus, then it potentially could have prevented the victimization of several members of the campus community. Nope. Don't want to tell people there's a crime on campus. Let's just hide it. That was number 7. You get why there's a fine here. Oh my God. I'm going to jump to number 8. Was that 8? Oh, no. Let's get to number 8. Failure to maintain an accurate and complete daily crime log. Liberty was supposed to maintain a daily readable report of all the crimes in the area. They did not. And check this out. Oh my God, check this out. And Liberty did not include entries for smaller offenses, including simple assault, weapons offenses, and alcohol and drug infractions. They just didn't put those on the list. Oh, check this out. Here's one that they also did not put on the list. The incident associated with this report constituted an alleged rape that was committed by a former Liberty president in the police department's patrol zone. The crime is not entered in the daily crime log. A president of Liberty University was accused of rape. They didn't put that on the books as a crime. By the way, I should say Jerry Falwell Jr. spoke to the press about this after this report was issued in October, and he said, quote, "That was absolutely not an allegation about me." And as far as I can tell, he's correct. That was not an allegation about him. But you get the seriousness of this allegation, right? Like, a school's president was accused of this. The school didn't report it to anybody. In many cases, this report says, when multiple crimes happen at the same time, so like this crime happened and this crime happened and this crime happened all to the same person, Liberty would only log the most serious crime, which is why those lesser offenses like assault, weapons, alcohol, drugs, they were omitted from the reports because something more serious happened. Let's just say one thing happened instead of 3. And there's one other thing to show you here about the weapons, or this part. This is the data. This is the total daily crime log entries. You could see, like in 2016, 497 things were entered into the system, but 101 were omitted and 242 had errors or omissions. And look at this. In summary, this data shows that 93% of the required line items in Liberty's daily crime logs were deficient or missing during the review period. How messed up is that? And look at this. In 2022 alone, 571 incidents of crime that were required to be entered on the log were omitted in their entirety. They're just trying to hide all of this from people. It's so messed up. I'm going to move on. Number 9, failure to define Clery geography in accordance with federal regulations. This kind of makes sense when you think about it. The federal government says, what counts as like a crime on campus? Where do you have to be on the lookout for it? Well, if we're looking on a map, it's wherever your campus is. But what if you have like, here's a circle of where Liberty is. What if there's a building just off campus that is Liberty University's property? Do you include that? You're supposed to. But Liberty basically found reasons to just say that doesn't count. If something happens like outside this tiny little circle, we're just going to pretend it doesn't apply to us. Okay. And that meant by lowballing their geographical area, it lowered the number of crimes they had to report. And specifically, when you go over this, look at what they said did not count as part of their geography. Liberty Christian Academy, a K-12 school for children that is on campus. They also said, oh, there's a hotel on campus, Fairfield Inn, even though it's on campus. And like if parents come to visit, we might say, stay at the Fairfield Inn. They said, no, we're not. If something happens at the hotel, that's not the campus. So we're not going to include it, even though they were supposed to. What else did they exclude? Liberty failed to identify the Center for Engineering Research and Education as a non-campus building. They should have included it. They did not. And they also failed to include basically immediately adjacent and accessible public property. Basically, there are roads outside of Liberty University, and they were like, that's the city's, that's not ours. And even though, no, it's still yours, Liberty, you have to count that. Here's an amazing one. I didn't even know this was a thing. They said, hey, we have a place called the Liberty Godparent Home. And what that is if you're a woman on campus and you have a baby, but you're not married, you're a bad, bad girl and you have sinned. We should kick you off campus. But if you want to stay on campus, we need you to stay in the Godparent Home where we can watch over you so you you young woman cannot be a slut anymore. Something like that. So they had a Liberty Godparent Home to house all these single women in wedlock. And they said, oh no, that doesn't count as part of Liberty's campus. So if any violence happens there, not our problem. Liberty University's online facility. They have a big online program and they have a campus building connected to house that program. They didn't count that. They didn't count the medical group that was on campus. Like none of this counted for them. They just said, no, that's not our problem. But the Clery Act, the Department of Education says, no, buddy, this is all part of your campus. All of this counts. I'm going to jump over to number 10. Failure to comply with Title IV record retention requirements. Basically, Liberty didn't keep good paperwork. And I want to show you this. Liberty failed to retain the required records necessary to show they're complying with the Clery Act. This failure has caused actual harm to individuals who have tried to access their own educational and employment records and has compromised the department's ability to conduct required oversight and monitoring activities. Like, they're just doing such a horrible job that it's actually putting kids in danger. And there was one amazing thing in here. During this program review, the Department of Education determined that senior officials in human resources sought the assistance of IT staff to wipe certain computer hard drives on April 26, 2022, the very week that the Department of Education's review team first visited the campus. As soon as we said we were visiting the campus, you all asked the tech people to come erase your hard drives, and we caught you. Oh my God. Now, I should say later on in this report, Liberty responded to that and said, this was not anything bad. We promised we weren't doing anything shady there. And the final determination here, oh, here we go. The university provided credible evidence showing that information that was stored on these drives was uploaded to a cloud-based storage account. And based on that information, the Department of Education recognizes that the reference is suggesting that they deleted the data from the hard drive with ill intent is not supported by the current record. So here's an example of something the government said back in October. Liberty University comes back and says, you guys, I know that looks bad, but we have evidence that we did not delete anything. The government looked at that information and said, you know what? We'll give it to you. That seems fair. And that's kind of what you want in these reports. But even though that one specific example aside, there was evidence they did not keep good records, and that's disturbing. And here is the last thing they said in this report. Finding 11, failure to publish and distribute annual security report in accordance with federal regulations. This is a quick one. Liberty, like I said, was supposed to share information about crime on campus with everybody. And if you were a senior in high school thinking about going to Liberty, you were supposed to know where you could find that information. Liberty did not make that information accessible to anybody over those years. So, I know it's a lot, but I feel like if you're reading an article about this story, they're only going to give you the top line information. But when you actually read this report, it is so damning. Liberty may still be, if they don't fix this, it is such a dangerous place for students to go. And listen, colleges, public universities, they have their problems too. Of course they do. But Liberty is not better than those schools, but they tried to pass it off as if they were. There was a 12th finding from the Department of Education that said failure to protect whistleblower from retaliation. And basically what they said, and this was in those October headlines about Liberty University, they said there was an employee who raised concerns about a lot of this stuff I just told you about. And they said, you need to do a better job of protecting women. And then like 2 days later, that employee was fired for basically blowing the whistle on how badly the school was doing. And in fact, Liberty University said, we have to give you a severance package, but only if you sign a non-disclosure agreement to never discuss this. And the employee said, I'm not signing your NDA. But when the government looked into that, Liberty officials said, we have, quote, legitimate, non-discriminatory reasons for terminating the employee. They had good reason for getting rid of that particular person, and it wasn't out of revenge for what that person was doing. And the government said, we find that response, quote, persuasive. And so they just deleted that finding. It didn't make the final report. Okay, so given all of that, basically with those 11 findings, the government listed, here's what you did wrong. Here's what we said you did wrong. Here is your response to us. And here's our final report on that. We still say you made a big mistakes for 11 reasons. Liberty says, yeah, we did. We agree. We made mistakes. We will pay the $14 million and we'll spend $2 million over the next 2 years to make sure we're doing everything right in the future. And that's important and good. I should say this, Liberty University put out a statement. Let me share this with you here. Liberty University put out a statement yesterday, I should say. And one of the things they pointed out, basically documenting this, while the university maintains that we have repeatedly endured selective and unfair treatment by the Department of Education, the university also concurs there were numerous deficiencies that existed in the past. We acknowledge and regret these past failures and have taken these necessary improvements seriously. Like, okay, sure, they were out to get you, but you acknowledge you did everything wrong. One important thing to note here, the school says it's not going to change the Liberty Way. Their rules for students that are so weirdly draconian. This is the one that says even if you're dating someone, like you can't have sex with them and we're going to expel you if we find out you do. This is the reason everyone makes fun of Christians for doing side hugs, because if you hold them for longer, if you hug someone of the opposite sex longer than like 5 seconds, it's blasphemy at Liberty's campus. One thing they do say that they instituted years ago an amnesty system. basically saying if you are a victim of sexual violence because you got drunk and then you got assaulted, we promise if you report that to us, we're not going to punish you for getting drunk, which should be the given, right? They said a lot of the students said, yeah, they have it, but a lot of students don't know that exists. A lot of students don't trust it. We think we're still going to get in trouble for it. And the school doesn't broadcast that it has an amnesty program. So now Liberty says we will better communicate that we have this at all times. The bottom line is that Liberty's problems were systemic. It wasn't a mistake. They chose to downplay crimes of all kinds. And whether that was out of sheer incompetence or because they wanted to present a better version of their school to potential students, none of that matters. Because the end result is that everyone on campus was worse off because of the school's negligence. I should say, when it comes to Clery Act violations, the biggest fine ever given was several years ago to Michigan State University, and it was for $4.5 million. And this followed the Larry Nassar controversy, where that coach was accused of sexually violating all of these students. That was $4.5 million. Liberty's fine, $14 million. So it's more than justified for all the damage they caused. My fear is that Liberty's endowment, look at this. This is from an article from an outlet called Virginia Business. Liberty's endowment is $2.17 billion in 2022, and its total assets without restrictions were just below $3.5 billion. Liberty has a ton of money in the bank, $3.5 billion that they can do whatever they want with. They're making $800 million a year from student loans. So a $14 million fine is nothing to them. Of course, they're going to pay it and get the government off their back. They will not feel the financial loss. But I think a big takeaway is that a conservative Christian school could not be trusted to do the right things, even when it came to student safety, until the federal government, run by Joe Biden, forced their hand and publicly shamed them along the way. If you left Liberty University to its own devices and its own leaders, everyone on campus would be in even more danger today. But because the Department of Education stepped in, now that's finally going to change. That would not have happened if Betsy DeVos was in charge. You can bet that would not happen if Donald Trump gets reelected again at the end of this year. Like now, thankfully, because of Biden, the biggest danger, at least in terms of what you can control, the biggest danger Liberty University students face is all the shit they're learning in their classes. But at least they can rest assured, okay, at least we're going to be warned if there's a predator on campus. I'm sorry, I know this is a long video, but you can understand why I need to go through this report, because the media articles that I saw about this fine could not go into details of how damning these allegations were, and Liberty cops up to all of it that I talked to you about. I will pause there because I need a break for a second. But man, that's such a messed up story in so many ways. How is this not all over the news? Thanks for covering it. I appreciate that. Um, Listen, there's a lot going on right now. That's why it's not in the news. But also, I mean, when the government issues a fine and the school says, yeah, we'll pay the fine, I guess the story's over for a lot of people. But I don't think a lot of people realize how much danger students were in. I still don't think they understand, like the thing I said about Liberty University, where if you're a woman and you say you've been sexually assaulted, maybe you were at a party and you got drunk and you fear going to your campus security because you think you're going to get in trouble for getting drunk. That's not just Liberty. This happens at conservative Christian colleges across the country. There have been so many articles about like Patrick Henry College elsewhere. I'm forgetting the name of a couple other ones, but this is a systemic problem at conservative Christian schools. Students are going to be students, and these schools punish them even when they're not the ones that did anything seriously wrong. I wish more people were covering that. I know there's other stuff going on, but it's disturbing. It's like an hour-long video for this, but it needs to be discussed. Maybe they had too much crime and not enough people to write up reports. Then maybe use some of that $3.5 billion endowment to maybe hire people to write up the crimes. Just hire one person to do Jerry Falwell Jr. specifically. Then you get everyone to do, like, seriously, this isn't for lack of money. They are drowning in money. They just don't care enough about student safety to take care of this stuff. Were all those students accounted for? The 40 that went missing, are they no longer missing? I assume they were all accounted for because I haven't heard of anyone like disappearing from campus long term. But like, there are rules. Like, if someone is gone for 24 hours, 48 hours, Liberty University should be telling everyone, hey, this student is missing. No one's heard from them. If you know something, let us know because we don't want anything bad to happen. And also, if someone took them, like, the faster you get that word out, the smaller the radius is of where they could be. So I assume everyone was found eventually. I'm assuming a lot of those cases are just students doing something irresponsible. But again, why aren't they alerting everyone on campus? That should be a given. And for their failure to comply, all they have to do is pay a fine. Yes, shaking my head, they should go to prison. I mean, it's systemic. It's not like one person failed. It was so many people in leadership who failed them. It's so disturbing. Is LU even accredited? Why would anyone even go there? They are accredited. I believe they are accredited. Why would anyone go there? Whole different conversation. There's a lot of reasons a lot of students go there, and it's not because they necessarily buy in to the fundamentalist Christianity that is promoted on campus. I mean, briefly, if your parents are paying for your college and they say you got to go to Liberty, that's a reason. What if you're an athlete who wants a Division One scholarship and you're not getting it from a school maybe that you really want to go to? Well, guess what? They have a chance of playing in the NCAA tournament next week when they announce who's playing. Because, I mean, they were in March Madness, weren't they? Like last year. That's an exciting thing for any player. Their football team was really good because they invested in football, like a lot of schools do. So I can understand why students would go there, but I don't think they all realize just how disturbing and dangerous it is until they get there. In some cases, I'm sure many religious schools have the same type of terrible problems, and I'm sure many public schools do too. I want to be clear about that and should be closed. I mean, again, every school is going to have problems. That's why the rules are in place. You're supposed to follow the law then. And if you're not following the law, you should be punished. The fact that this went on, this dragged out, the Clery Act fine covers like 2016 to like 2023. It's not many years, but that means this bad stuff was happening for such a long time and no one was doing any of the tracking that they needed to do. And I mean, every school that has problems like these should be punished. And if they can't fix it, then yeah, they should be closed. Liberty University has the ability to do something about these issues. However, the people running it choose not to do so. Well, now they're saying they will. I mean, that's the big takeaway from this week, which is, okay, here's the final report. And that includes statements from Liberty University saying, we know what we did wrong. We are literally spending $2 million over the next 2 years to hire people to make sure we're doing everything right, according to the law anyway. So if they didn't choose not to do it, they made a hell of a lot of mistakes along the way. Again, is it because they're just bad at their jobs or because they didn't care? I don't know which one is better. Crimes that might embarrass the school. Bury it. Seriously, that's their motto at Liberty, it seems like. The evil is coming from inside the house. No kidding. For all the talk about how sinners are outside the campus, and if you don't have God, you're an immoral person, all this immoral stuff is happening on campus. And it's not like bad people are always coming from the outside on campus. A lot of it's happening within the campus. And those are people who have signed statements of faith. You know what I mean? I mean, then you get into Jerry Falwell Jr. too. So that's, I didn't even talk about Jerry Falwell Jr. Like, that's such a separate issue from all of this, which is hilarious. He doesn't even play a role in this, except he was in charge of that school for so many years. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next story. I promise it won't be as long. And this is kind of good news in a way. Let me make sure I'm pulling up the stuff I want to pull up here. Give me 1 second to do this. Yeah, here we go. I'm gonna close half my tabs. There's a lot. Uh oh, that feels nice. Okay, tabs are closed. Let's talk about the Jehovah's Witnesses because on Monday, a Norwegian court upheld a decision to rescind the religious community status of the Jehovah's Witnesses. And basically, the big takeaway here is that this blocks the Jehovah's Witnesses from getting taxpayer funded subsidies, which is a big deal, which I will talk about in a second, and they can't perform legal marriages anymore, which is a smaller issue, but also that's kind of a thing religions do. And it took 2 years to get to this point and a lawsuit. And the government warned the Jehovah's Witnesses this could happen. And now it finally happened. And basically, the reason this is a welcome decision is because the Norwegian government is treating the Jehovah's Witnesses like any other group. And they're not giving them preferential treatment just because they're a religion, which coming from the United States, that's incredible. And this will, I mean, if you are a practicing Jehovah's Witness, you're fine. You could still be a Jehovah's Witness. It doesn't ban anyone from practicing the faith. It doesn't stop people from gathering in kingdom halls and practicing their faith or anything like that. The only thing that happens is you're not going to get gifts from the government just because you're a member of this group. Okay? You're not going to get a taxpayer gift. And let me back up for a second. Here's the issue in Norway. Norway's funny because it has a national church, but it doesn't actually have a national religion. But it's a country where religion is literally supported by taxpayers. Like the more members you have, the more money your religion gets. And that applies to humanist groups as well. And basically, this is one article. This is from the US State Department, but let me show you this. According to their own research, like all registered faith and life stance organizations are eligible to apply for financial support from the government. The government pays prorated subsidies to 724 such organizations based on their membership numbers, at least in 2021, which is when this article is from, as compared to membership numbers of the Church of Norway. So basically, if you're a religious group and you say, hey, we're Pastafarians, we're a religion, and we have more than 50 members, you can apply to get these federal subsidies so you could practice your faith. It's kind of amazing. 724 groups have gotten that type of funding in 2021. And the law is very open about what counts as a religion. However, there are a few lines in the sand when it comes to this. And let me show you this. I'm going to start sharing a few, they look like sketchy websites. And the reason is that I would love to show you the official Norwegian websites, but they're in another language and won't make sense. But there are websites that have like crude translations of what the law says. But here's the issue. Look at this. Grounds for refusing grants. When is the government allowed to say, yeah, we're not giving your group money? If a faith or belief community or individuals acting on behalf of the community use violence or coercion, make threats, violate children's rights, violate statutory prohibitions on discrimination, or in other ways seriously violate the rights and freedoms of others, they may not get any money. Those are the rules. That's how it works. If you're doing some really bad stuff, no money for you. I mean, I feel like that makes sense. They're not going to deny you money just because they don't like what you believe, though, right? That makes sense. Like a group that endorses violence should not get taxpayer money. And if your group wants to hurt kids or violate human rights, you shouldn't get money. And I know there are atheists who may argue like, well, if they're teaching kids creationism, or there's any form of religious indoctrination going on, that counts as child abuse. Okay, that's a philosophical stance you may have. But for the government's purposes, they are limiting themselves to things that are irrefutable and not up for debate. Okay, so that doesn't count. But here's what they do count. If your group forces people to be members, that violates the rules. You can't ban members of your group from interacting with non-members. You can't like create a bubble like a cult and say you're only allowed to talk to these people and anyone else you're forbidden from speaking to. No, now you're violating the rules. You can't make kids pledge a lifelong commitment to your religion because the kid's stupid. It's a kid. They don't know any better. That violates children's rights. And like basically practicing faith is fine, but cult like behavior is not tolerated. And if any group crosses those boundaries, they might lose government funding. So this is where we get to the Jehovah's Witnesses, because in 2021, according to a lot of information, here we go. Let me show you this. This is from another one of those sites that's crudely translated into English. According to an overview from the Ministry of Children and Families, there were 12,686 subsidy paying members in Jehovah's Witnesses in 2021. And according to the administrator, because they had like 12,000 plus members, they get 16 million Norwegian monies. That amounts to like almost $2 million US dollars. They got about $2 million in support because they had that many members. So in 2021, the government said, we're going to explore your beliefs here because we're disturbed. Basically, there were two former Jehovah's Witnesses and another whistleblower who sent the government letters saying the Jehovah's Witnesses are violating the rules. And it's not that their beliefs were secret, but government officials kind of needed that paperwork in order to get the investigation rolling. They can't just say, what should we do today? Hey, let's go pick on the Jehovah's Witnesses. No, they needed paperwork that said we're members and they're violating the rules. The government gets that information and they say, all right, we'll investigate. And so some of those claims were open to debate. For example, the Jehovah's Witnesses say members cannot get involved in politics. That's why Jehovah's Witnesses, even if you know any, they do not vote in elections. One former member argued to the government that since voting in an election could lead to you getting kicked out of the witnesses, which means members of the Jehovah's Witnesses could not interact with you, the no voting rule violated the law. Well, the witnesses responded to that, like Jehovah's Witness leaders responded to that saying, we're allowed to set our own rules. And if someone wants to vote, they're allowed to vote. And then, yeah, they would be kicked out, but that's their decision. There's nothing coercive about that. And the government said, yeah, you guys, you can have your wacky beliefs. We don't care about that. But there were a couple of concerns that the government took very seriously. Number one, the Jehovah's Witnesses engage in something called disfellowshipping. Basically, if you choose to not be a Jehovah's Witness anymore, you're effectively excommunicated from the group. Members are told they cannot have any meaningful interactions with you. Like if you personally decided, I don't believe in God anymore, I think I'm going to leave the Jehovah's Witnesses, but your parents are still alive and they are practicing JWs, they cannot interact with you anymore. They are told, nope, just don't answer their calls. If they call you, you don't answer it. That's how it works. It tears apart families. It is horrifying what they put people through. And the idea is that those people who have left the fold, they will get so lonely, they will get so depressed that they will come crawling back to you. But there are no shortage of families who have been torn apart over that. And what the Norwegian government said is that the law requires that all religions that receive government subsidies practice a right to free withdrawal. Like if there's a serious obstacle to leaving a religion, that's a problem. So disfellowshipping, according to the government administrator who wrote this article, it can cause members to feel pressured to remain in the faith community. And that violates the rules of the tax subsidies. So that was problem number one. By having an excommunication policy, you're making it really hard for people to leave your organization, and that's kind of culty, so you can't do that. Number two was how that practice applied to children. Because if a child in a JW family, like, makes it, according to the Jehovah's Witnesses, if a child makes it a habit to break the moral standards of the Bible and does not repent, Children are supposed to be treated like pariahs. That means if there's a young teenager, whether or not they're baptized, who quits the religion, that applies to them too. They may not be kicked out of the house, but the rebellious child is not allowed to have contact with other close family members like grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, or friends. And according to the government in Norway, that I'm sorry, I'm not quoting them. I'm just saying this. This puts pressure on the kids to stay in the religion, which is a violation of their own rights under Norwegian law. According to the government official, we consider social isolation a form of punishment against the child. So, because of those two issues, because they are systematic, because they are intentional, and because the Jehovah's Witnesses did not deny that any of that happens, that's why the government said, yeah, then you're not getting any taxpayer funds. You can practice your religion however you want to, but you're not getting a reward from the government for it. So basically, they Jehovah'd themselves out of 2 million US dollars. And at the time that this happened, like a year ago, the witnesses said, we're going to appeal this decision. We're going to explain why, we're not doing anything wrong. Stop persecuting us because of our religion. There's nothing wrong with it. But that appeal didn't go anywhere. You know why? Because there's no counterpoint. There's no rebuttal to what I just said. Like the witnesses can do whatever they want. They just don't get a government handout for it. It's not unfair though. Like the Catholic Church, just to give you one example, they have a lot of problems. But if you quit the Catholic Church, there is no formal policy designed to make you suffer for it. You might have arguments with family members. You might struggle with the loss of your community with shared beliefs, at least for a while. But the church itself doesn't go out of its way to make your life worse. Jehovah's Witnesses absolutely do. And if nothing else, I would hope that this decision spurs other religious groups to look at their own policies, because if they want that sweet, sweet taxpayer money, they need to play by the rules. And so at the end of 2022, the Norwegian government said, okay, you heard our ruling. This is why you're no longer a religious community under the law, so you don't get the taxpayer money. And if you perform a marriage, it doesn't count. Those people you married still have to come to the government to get their official license and all that stuff. And the Jehovah's Witnesses in Norway said, they tried to remedy the program. They said, we're going to make sure you're respecting our beliefs. But long story short, nothing they did made a difference, because at the end of the day, the beliefs are their beliefs. No one's trying to make up any of this. This is what they believe. This is what they do. And now, no matter how much they tried to stop it, they even sued the Norwegian government to try to stop it. There was a trial held in January of this year trying to say, you can't not give us the money. And what happened this week on Monday is that a district court in Norway, in Oslo, announced that, yeah, we heard the trial and the government hasn't done anything wrong. The decision not to give the Jehovah's Witnesses any money in 2022 and 2023 was upheld. Like the Jehovah's Witnesses were asking for like $3.5 million that they were owed. And the court said, yeah, you're not getting that for the past 2 years, which is hilarious. And on top of that, not only are they not going to get any more money in the future from the government, they also had to pay the state's legal bills, which amounts to like 100,000 US dollars. Hilarious. So they sued to try to get back pay for 2 years. They're not going to get any of that. And the response that I've been hearing from ex-Jehovah's Witnesses is just, thank you. Thank you to the Norwegian government for taking this seriously, not cowering because it happens to be a powerful religious group. That is important. And I think there's also an unintended consequence of this, because citizens are now very alert because of this case. Citizens in Norway are alert to the fact that, hey, we don't need to prop up a church if we don't have an allegiance to it, because their taxes help pay for these religious subsidies. And so a lot of times you might say, yeah, the nation's evangelical Lutheran church, that's the one my family belongs to. I don't really believe in God, but sure, I'll call myself a Lutheran or I'll call myself a Catholic, even though I don't believe. But when you say you're a Catholic or you say you're a Lutheran, those churches get to call you a member and they get money because of it. And here's what's really funny about this. In 2016, the nation's Lutheran Church launched a website to try to, modernize themselves, and it made it easier to track members and enroll new ones, but it backfired because thousands of people use the website to opt out of church membership altogether, depriving the church of that government funding. Hilarious. In 2015, by the way, the Catholic Church owed the Norwegian government about 5 million US dollars because it was found that they fraudulently registered thousands of people on their list because they got taxpayer dollars for it. The Catholic Church also created an app for members, again, modernizing it. And then 11,000 Norwegians resigned because all they had to do was like click a few buttons and they could say they were no longer Catholic. And it made it a lot easier. And it's not just symbolic. I'm sure it felt good, but ultimately doesn't mean anything. Yes, it does. Because the reason so many people actively went through those motions is because they didn't want the government giving those churches money. And there are plenty of people in the US, maybe you're one of them. You call yourself Catholic, Christian, Lutheran, Methodist, whatever, because it's cultural. It's what you were raised in, even though you don't really believe and you don't go to church anymore. But there's no real incentive to tell the church, hey, take me off your list. I'm not one of you anymore. That's like going to the DMV. Do I really want to go through all that hassle? And for what? In my head, I know I'm not one of them. But in Norway, there is a financial change if you say I want out. Like, it just shows you how many religious institutions in Norway have financially benefited from the apathy of their own lapsed members. For now, though, the bottom line is Jehovah's Witnesses in Norway, they won't be receiving any federal benefits. And it's their own damn fault because their beliefs are cruel and manipulative, and they finally got called out for it. So, yay. What questions do we have about that? I'm sure there are some. Anytime you start talking about JW, you should start with knock knock. Who's there? Yep, because I don't even get knocks on the door anymore. I just get handwritten letters sent to my home, like sometimes written by a child saying, "Hello, I am little Bobby. Come be a Jehovah's Witness." It's like, no, you're going in the garbage. But I don't know. I don't know if I think since COVID, they do less door knocking and more letter writing. I could be wrong about that. Life stance. Is that anything like worldview? Yeah, it might be. I think if I have that context correct, it might be. I'd prefer religions not get any money from the government, and I agree with you. And they need to pay taxes and publish their financial books. I would love that. That would be wonderful. But in Norway, where they had like a national religion, like it's the weird thing about Europe, right? Like church and state are quite literally intertwined, and a lot of people are non-religious because they just don't care. And in the US, where we ostensibly have separation of church and state, you can't get away from religion. They don't believe in the government. You're not allowed to join. Yeah, the Jehovah's Witnesses don't believe in the government. You're not allowed to join the military. You're not allowed to take blood to save your life. Any of these things causes you to be kicked out. And again, those rules, everyone knows about them. The rule that says you can't receive blood, you can't get a blood transfusion. The government's not saying we're punishing you for that rule. But if you do get a transfusion, and they kick you out and you're not allowed to interact with people anymore, that is the thing that is coercive. And that is what the witnesses got punished for. Yeah, it's amazing. But they will take government money after all that. Yeah, it was one of the hypocritical things about all of this. They don't want anything to do with the government, but they'll gladly take taxpayer dollars to promote themselves. Thank you for making that point. Can we get that rule here? I wish. Then again, I'm kind of afraid of that, only because the last thing we need is more money going to religious organizations. Isn't that what vouchers are? Like giving taxpayer dollars to private religious schools when they should be going to like public schools. The last thing we need is for other taxpayer dollars to go to like white evangelical megachurches. They don't need it. Give me 1 second to close about 300 Norwegian websites here for a second. Okay. All right. Let me get to this story right here. Oh, this is disturbing, but important. Okay. Here we go. This week, Larry and Carmen Musgrave, who are the owners of a Christian boarding school in Missouri, they were arrested and put in jail after being charged with kidnapping a former student. And you got to see this. In Missouri, a sheriff actually posted this on Facebook. And I'm not going to read the whole thing here, but it says, okay, Larry, Carmen, they were arrested. But look at why. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm not going to read all of this, but basically, Sheriff Finch was contacted by a former student and traveled to Alabama to interview the victim. After the interview, Sheriff Finch was able to make contact with several past students, and interviews are forthcoming. According to Sheriff Finch, this investigation is far from being over. And what this is about is this place right here. It's called ABM Ministries, also known as Lighthouse Christian Academy. And they have this website clearly made in like 1994. And it's basically a Christian ministry that runs what they call a Christian school. And here's the reason this is important. In Missouri, over the past couple of years, there's several Christian boarding schools that have been shut down because holy crap, they are doing bad things to these kids. Specifically, if you want to Google any of this, Circle of Hope Girls Ranch and Boarding School, Agape Boarding School. Google those, you will go down a rabbit hole. But the reason they have these Christian boarding schools in Missouri is because they're largely unregulated. They rely on their religious labels to win the trust of a lot of unsuspecting families. And basically, these families are told, hey, you have a troubled child who's acting out. Well, send them to our location and they will get a much needed faith-based rehabilitation. All you got to do is give us your child and give us a lot of money. And the thing that has happened is instead of making things better, the Christian ranches have basically become hotbeds of physical, emotional, and sometimes sexual abuse that leaves these children far worse off than when they entered. And that's what seems to be the case with Lighthouse Christian Academy. And what I want to show you is this article that was published in the Kansas City Star. This is from February, just a few weeks ago. Kansas City Star, really, really fantastic reporters here, Laura Bauer and Judy Thomas. But I wanted to read you the beginning of this because this is about this Lighthouse Christian Academy. Basically, sorry, I'm going to try to get rid of this pop-up here. Sierra Osborne was driving home from the store when two boys jumped out from behind a tree, waving her down. They were screaming, hands up in the air, trying to get me to stop. When she did, the older boy had one request. Ma'am, we just need you to call 911. And there are two boys, ages 12 and 14, who had walked miles without coats in temperatures hovering between the high 30s and low 40s. Osborne said they told her staff would often berate them and hit them for things like not getting their chores done fast enough. 12 and 14. They were just terrified. They were shaking. I don't know if it's just because they were that cold or what. Those two boys ran away from the ranch. And here's the amazing thing. They're not the only ones who did. I want to show you one other thing. This is from Facebook. That woman who stopped her car, she posted this on Facebook about this. This is how we learned about it in January. So I'm not reading all of this, but look at this. I brought them home, gave them a little food and water. We contacted the police. They said multiple times they needed they said multiple times they needed help, but they didn't want to go back to the boys' home. They told me about the abuse, like just horrifying stuff. My heart is breaking for these kids. I hope they get justice. The police didn't ask any questions, and as far as I know, they aren't taking any action on this. is there anything I can do to draw attention to this? I just believe they should be investigated or something. How's that for an understatement? So that's what was posted. That was a story people knew about. But here's the thing. After that article came out, it turns out there was a girl who attended the school like 2 decades ago. She told the reporters at the Kansas City Star that when she attended the school 20 years ago, when it was co-ed, now it's only boys, but when it was co-ed, she was forced to do manual labor, was physically abused, and placed in a literal chokehold by someone at the school. And it didn't look like those things had changed. And one of the reasons this has happened, maybe, is because one of the guys who works at the school, I'm going to scroll down to make sure we have this here. Where is this at that I was looking for? Maybe I don't have it. I'm going to tell you the director of ABM Ministries. His name is Julio Sandoval, and I'm going to talk about him more in a second. But according to the Star, 5 boys have run away from the school since the beginning of 2024. And as I showed you a second ago, the sheriff's department did put out a statement about all this, like shortly after. Look at this. The dateline here, that lady picked up those boys at the end of January. This is March 2nd. And this sheriff says, yeah, we know there was another kid. The people who ran that school, they were arrested. We said they were attempting to kidnap somebody. But look at the bottom here. I anticipate more charges as the investigation continues. I know you can't see it because my head's in the way. There you go. I anticipate more charges as the investigation continues, with more alleged victims coming forward. It makes it sound like that lady was asking, why is no one doing anything about this? The sheriff's like, no, I promise you, we are doing stuff about this. We're in the middle of our investigation. Like, we need time. So I'm not sure why the arrests came now, when it seems, according to former students, they've been telling their stories to law enforcement officials for years. And even the 2 boys who were picked up by that nice woman, they said they told authorities about it. But at the time, they were told they didn't provide enough information to meet the criteria to launch an investigation. But according to the sheriff, an investigation is taking place, and we've been working on it for a while. In fact, in that statement, he said an active investigation was launched several months ago. Who are you going to believe? The law enforcement official who says, we've been working on this for a while, or all the students who say, we've gone to the police and told them our stories, and they told us we don't have anything? So that's one thing. I also am not entirely clear why the Musgraves, the man and wife who were arrested, I'm not sure why they were charged with kidnapping when there are so many other things that they appear to be doing wrong. I don't know about that. But according to law enforcement officials, they raided the school on Friday. There were still 19 boys held there in captivity, apparently, and I don't know what's going on with them. But the reason all of this is even a story is because these things have been happening for a while. In 2021, some of these Christian boarding schools began making headlines for alleged abuse, and the stories were so disturbing. Everything I've just told you is about this one school, but the stories at the other one, Circle of Hope, Agape, they were so disturbing that Republicans in Missouri's legislature passed a bill requiring some oversight of these schools. Do you know how bad shit has to be for Republicans to say, maybe we should try to hold religious people accountable? It's bad. And honestly, they didn't even ask for a lot. Like, for years, all these religious boarding schools were fully exempt from any statewide regulations. Now they have to meet basic health and safety guidelines, do background checks on employees, provide students with necessities like food and health care, and give parents access to their kids at all times. That's what Republicans passed a bill saying, all right, you got to do at least that. It's not much. The bar is very low. But even that wasn't enough to prevent the alleged abuse at Lighthouse. And the arrest of those 2 people suggests that some of these students, maybe they'll find closure now, that the people in charge are maybe going to face consequences, because if they are convicted of first-degree kidnapping, those 2 people who ran the school, they could face between 10 and 30 years in prison, which, I mean, they're old. It could be a life sentence for them. Who knows? I want to show you one other thing before I wrap this up, which is I was doing some research on this, and I found this on Reddit. Uh, this is 27 days ago, and this is someone posting about ABM Ministries. And look at this. This is before all these stories really came out. I created this post in hopes of reaching people who might be looking into ABM Ministries in Missouri. Whether you're looking in because you're thinking about sending your child there, or maybe in the future, people will finally be hearing about this place on the news. Either way, I'm glad you found this. I attended ABM in 2008, 2009. I was a 15-year-old girl who had began to act out slightly as a typical teenager would. Long story short, my mom sent me there. On the website, it appeared to be a wonderful boarding school. What I endured was anything but that. The physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual abuse that I and so many other children experienced was criminal. Carmen and Larry Musgraves were manipulative to parents and used children for physical labor without any regulations or oversight. The school has had 5 children run away in the last month, and local police and news stations are unwilling to acknowledge the activities. I would love to see a day of justice for the kids involved now and those previously affected by this unlicensed organization. No child deserves to suffer abuse. I did reach out to that person on Reddit. I did not hear back because I really wanted to hear her story. But that's the sort of thing. These people have been trying to get their stories out for years. And thank goodness for those Kansas City Star reporters for taking it seriously. And maybe now the sheriff is taking it seriously. Who knows? I hope there's some justice. I hope that place shuts down. Some of those other boarding schools have been shut down. Really quick side note. The Kansas City Star noted, I think it was a separate article, but in 2009, the Musgraves and the principal of the school were sued in 2009 for alleged sexual abuse by the principal of the school. The lawsuit was settled in 2010 with a $100,000 judgment against the principal and a $750,000 judgment against ABM Ministries and the Musgraves. Just another example of how these religious leaders who cloak themselves in faith-based rhetoric are often a serious threat to children, while all the people conservatives call groomers, drag queens, LGBTQ people, liberal allies, nothing like that at all. The other thing I wanted to point out to you is the husband and wife that ran the Circle of Hope boarding school that was shut down after all this bad press. They are scheduled to have their trial this fall. They've pleaded not guilty to 102 criminal charges of child abuse. So that's important. And the other thing I wanted to point out is that the director of ABM Ministries, Julio Sandoval, you know what his previous job was? It was Dean of Agape Boarding School, which happens to be another school that was shut down for very disturbing behavior involving the kidnapping of a child. That guy lost his job from Agape and then went to go work at this place. So maybe justice will be served. I'll pause there. If there are any other questions, happy to check them out. The troubled teen industry is disgusting, horrifically harmful, and often fatal to children and needs to be shut down. No kidding. I agree. Whether it's like a daytime talk show or a Christian boarding school, it's all extremely disturbing. I'm right there with you. The fact that a group of people think treating children like this is okay is horrifying. And the thing is, they justify it by just saying, I'm doing what God wants me to do. Like that is their get out of jail free card for everything until it's not. You know, they call those requirements persecution. Oh, I know they do. And I know the Jehovah's Witnesses are going to say the same thing about what Norway's government's doing. All right, I'm going to pause there. Let me move on to the next story. I'm going to try to wrap this up in time. I don't know if you've heard this story or not. The Biden administration did something really impressive. It took a really long time for it to happen. And because of all the stuff in the news, I don't think it's going to get much attention. But I want to applaud the Biden administration for doing this thing because it's a big deal. Basically, during the Trump era, his Department of Education a lot of departments, not just Department of Education, his administration, the Trump administration, opened the door to religious discrimination to so many groups that receive taxpayer dollars to provide social services. And the Biden administration has finally undone all of that. Most of that, I should say. Like, it's a big step in the right direction. Let me try to explain this as best I can. I'll try to do this justice. Like, here's the thing. The US government, they regularly work with religious groups to provide social services to people who need them. Like, when it comes to feeding the homeless, like, it's the government might say, hey, you know what? There's a lot of church ministries that run soup kitchens, and it's okay for us to give them money to serve the unhoused people in their communities. And you know what? I'm fine with that. The government can absolutely contract with religious organizations as long as they're not funding religion itself. You know what I mean? But if your group is like, we want to feed the homeless because that's what our religion tells us we ought to do, I don't mind if they're getting taxpayer dollars to do that. I think that's a good thing. So that's what the government does, and that's fine, as long as they're not using their money to advance their religious beliefs themselves or pressure recipients of their generosity to adopt them. Okay? So in 2016, there were rules put in place, I should say under President Obama, there were rules put in place in 2016 to let the recipients of this generosity know what their rights were. And those rules included a ban on religious discrimination for any of the groups receiving federal funds. There was a requirement that the groups had to inform recipients of their rights, like telling them you don't have to attend a religious function to receive food or services of any kind. If a recipient had a problem with the religious nature of the group providing aid, those groups had to refer recipients to an alternative provider. And most importantly, all recipients were told they could report violations of their religious protections to the government group administering the program. So Obama's administration put all those rules in place. They were sensible rules. It doesn't stop any of these religious groups from doing the thing they want to do. It doesn't infringe upon their religious beliefs. It just put more legal rights in the hands of recipients. Then Donald Trump came into office. And what did they do? They said, "What? Why are we trying to help the recipients? We ought to be helping the religious organizations. And how can we help them? Let's walk back all those protections. Let's not burden the religious groups with things like, you got to let people know about their rights. No. That's too much. That's too much hard work." So specifically, faith-based groups receiving federal funding under Trump no longer had to refer recipients to alternative providers if they had a problem with like the religious stuff that was happening. Recipients did not have to be informed of their legal rights. The rules also benefited the faith-based groups. It allowed them to perform religious functions using federal funds, even though the Obama rules separated those things. They also allowed faith-based groups to require attendance for any activity deemed necessary for recipients receiving the services. So if, for example, a homeless shelter said, we're going to provide you shelter, but you have to come to our prayer meetings every night, and we get government money for running the shelter, the Trump administration said, yeah, that's cool. You can totally do that, and you could force people to come to the prayer circle meeting every day. And the Trump administration said, we're putting these rules in place. I'm going to show you something from the Trump administration. This is from December of 2020, when the Trump administration was still there. Look at this. This is under William Barr, Attorney General. This rule ensures equal treatment for faith-based organizations consistent with the Constitution and other federal law. It removes requirements in prior regulations that placed unequal burdens on religious organizations. It was so hard for them to inform people of their rights, cast unwarranted suspicion on them, and were in tension with their religious liberty rights. Like, you've got to be kidding me. They didn't have to do much, and the Trump administration's like, let's make it easier for them to discriminate on the basis of their religion. Like, and again, what type of services are we talking about? Food banks, homeless shelters, domestic violence shelters, job training, elderly care. there's a lot of religious groups that work in those areas, and the Trump administration is saying, yeah, we'll give you federal funds, we'll give you taxpayer dollars to do all that, and if you want to force religion onto the people you're helping, we're good with it. Under the Obama era rules, they couldn't do that. Under Trump, they could. At the time, I want to show you this. This is from Melissa Rogers, who used to be under the Obama administration. She was the executive director of the White House Office of Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships. And when those Trump rules went into effect, this is what she wrote on what was then called Twitter. Earlier today, the Trump administration released proposed rules regarding government partnerships with faith-based orgs. I'm deeply disappointed that it continues to seek to remove valuable protections for social service beneficiaries' religious liberties. For example, the Trump administration, would end the requirement that beneficiaries be notified of these protections. You can't benefit from protections you don't know you have. The religious liberty of social service beneficiaries is as important as the religious liberty of faith-based providers. And of course, she was right about that. Those were horrible rules to put into place. But those rules went into effect at the very end of the Trump administration in Trump's final weeks in office. The rules were so horrible that there was actually a lawsuit filed against all the departments, like the entire cabinet. Look at this. Who are they suing? Department of Health and Human Services, Department of Agriculture, and so on. Who is suing them? A lot of organizations that have religious roots, including a Jewish group up there, the New York City Gay and Lesbian Anti-Violence Project. Then you also have Freedom from Religion Foundation, American Atheists. You have the Hindu American Foundation. All of them filed a lawsuit saying, you can't do this. You can't allow the government to say, yeah, we'll give you money for your faith-based organization, and you can force religion onto people. American Atheists even said this in the lawsuit. In a recent study, substantial numbers of atheists reported negative experiences in receiving mental health, substance abuse, reproductive health, and other health services because of their non-religious identity, all of which are services frequently supported with federal funding. Basically, they were saying atheists have it hard enough as is, and the government's going to make it worse for atheists to receive these supports. There were also some legal problems with what Trump did, including the fact that the public wasn't allowed to comment on those proposed changes in a timely fashion, and the final rule did not take into consideration potential harms that the changes would cause. They were supposed to do all that. They didn't do the paperwork, basically. And the lawsuit pointed out that groups like FFRF and American Atheists would now have to devote more resources to telling recipients of federal aid about their religious rights, which would get in the way of them doing what their mission requires them to do. Like, we can't do our day jobs because now we got to waste time doing the government's job because of this. That's why they were suing. But then Joe Biden became president. And guess what? Melissa Rogers, who worked under Obama and then was posting on Twitter under Trump, Joe Biden put her back in charge of the new White House Office of Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships. And one of the things they did when he came into office is they promised to look into reversing all these changes. And the people who sued, the lawsuit was put on hold while they gave the Biden administration a chance to fix this. And this week, the Biden administration's proposed changes were finalized. That is what happened this week. Let me show you what they put out here. This is from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. For immediate release, March 1st, Biden-Harris administration restores important protections for beneficiaries of federally funded social services. And I want to point you to a few things right here that they specifically called out. Check this out. With the new rules, it requires those taxpayer-funded organizations to notify beneficiaries of their right to be free from discrimination on the basis of religion. And in fact, the Biden administration is going to give them, like, here's what you can use if you don't want to make your own. We'll just give you a sample and you can adapt it as you need to. It also makes clear that all covered social service programs, whether you were getting services directly from a religious organization or you were using a voucher to get them, whoever's using any of this, those groups may not discriminate against beneficiaries on the basis of their religion. So if you're a Christian group and there's an atheist coming to you for help, you can't discriminate against them because of that, which some organizations are want to do. Finally, it encourages government agencies that fund domestic programs to help beneficiaries identify alternative federally funded service providers in their area. And I want to talk about that just for a second. So the big changes here, the Biden administration basically says, in the past, the group, you went to a Christian soup kitchen, they wanted you to pray or something, you didn't like it. You could say, I don't feel comfortable with this. The soup kitchen would have to say, well, then you can go here. They were required to do that. The Biden administration now says it's not their job to tell you where to go, but if you tell us this is happening, we will give you an alternative. And I think that helps them avoid a potential lawsuit. It's not as easy for the customer, for the client, but it puts the onus on the government instead of the religious organization. So not great, but it avoids a lawsuit. The voucher thing is interesting because previously, if you were using a voucher to get help, you were not guaranteed. You could have to participate in a religious service to get help. But if you were using a voucher, like there was no protection for you. People using vouchers under the Biden rules, they still are not guaranteed secular alternatives, but they don't have to be proselytized to. Okay. Like the government is now saying people providing those programs cannot discriminate on the basis of religion, whether you're using a voucher or getting help directly. So again, in general, the Biden administration is rolling back what the Trump administration did in important ways. It's not 100% rolled back, but it's like 90% rolled back, and all of it's good. It's important to happen. And basically, every church-state separation group you can think of was celebrating this. This is what Americans United said, for example. Religious freedom is a foundational American principle. No one should have to give up their religious freedom in order to have access to critical services. No one should ever be pressured to participate in religious activities or be required to meet a religious litmus test in exchange for the help they need. AU has worked tirelessly to restore these protections and address other Trump administration policies that undermine church-state separation and transform religious freedom from a shield that protects people into a sword to harm others. We are pleased that the Biden administration is rolling back many harmful Trump regulations. So they're excited about it. That's a good thing. They're not alone. American Atheists said the same thing. This is Nick Fish of American Atheists. We are relieved and grateful the Biden administration has affirmed that religion is not a license to discriminate. Whether they're faith-based or not, any organization getting taxpayer dollars should never be in the business of discriminating, denying care, or forcing Americans to do religious stuff. So all these rules, as it says at the bottom there, this all takes effect 1 month from now. But listen, there are reasons to criticize the Biden administration, rightfully so, but they get credit for this. They deserve credit when they do stuff right, and this is an important thing that needed to change, and it is finally changed. It's not like, I know it's not a huge deal, but it's important, and they got it done. So I'll stop there with this story. What else? What other? No questions right now. I'm going to wrap this up with one last story. I don't think this will take too long, but I was excited to share this with you. And basically, there is something in Congress called the Congressional Freethought Caucus. You may have heard of the Congressional Prayer Caucus. It's huge. It's mostly Republicans, but there are Democrats who are like, I love Jesus. I want to be a part of the Prayer Caucus. And it's powerful. Well, a few years ago, Jared Huffman, who is a member of Congress from California, he helped launch the Congressional Freethought Caucus. And I know that sounds like it's an atheisty thing, but it's not. Basically, the Freethought Caucus exists to promote reason-based public policy, to keep church and state separate, to oppose discrimination against non-religious people and championing freedom of thought around the world. Well, this week, I'm happy to tell you, there are two new members of the Freethought caucus, and that is Becca Balint from Vermont on the left and Eric Swalwell of California right above me there. Swalwell, you may be more familiar with because he's on TV a lot. Becca Balint from Vermont, she was elected in 2022 as Vermont's only member of Congress. She served 8 years in the state Senate before that. She was the first Jewish person this past November. She was the first Jewish member of Congress to call for a ceasefire in the war with Hamas. So progressive and awesome. Eric Swalwell, this is an interesting one because he was elected in 2012 and he became a regular fixture on MSNBC during the Trump era and still today. He served as a prosecutor during Trump's second impeachment. He actually used that as kind of a launching pad to gain the party's presidential nomination in 2020. That campaign did not really go anywhere. He dropped out. Joe Biden became the nominee, obviously. But there's one interesting thing about Eric Swalwell joining the Congressional Freethought Caucus, which is that when he was running in 2012, I don't know how many of you are old enough to remember this, but back in my day, there was a time in like 2007 when there was literally one member of Congress who had the guts to say he was openly non-religious. His name was Pete Stark. He was a congressman from California. He has since died, but he was in Congress and he said, I'm a Unitarian, but I don't believe in God. I'm a non-theist. And that was a big deal because there are like no members of Congress who are openly non-religious. Now we have one. It's Jared Huffman, the guy who started the Freethought Caucus. Well, in 2012, Pete Stark had been in Congress for decades. He was a fixture there. And in 2012, he faced a primary challenger for one of the only times you can imagine because he was a well-liked congressman from California. Guess who that challenger was? It was someone named Eric Swalwell. And one of the interesting things in that race is that I want to show you if I could find this here. There's something that he posted on his website at the time. Here it is. I thought I had this pulled up. Here's one reason I did not like Eric Swalwell for a very long time. This is from 2011 when he was running. I'm sorry, I should say that race was in 2011 or something. It may have been a special election. I don't remember. But do we trust Pete Stark to represent our views? There was a vote to reaffirm "In God We Trust" as our national motto. And you could see here, yesterday, the U.S. Congress voted 398-9 to reaffirm our national motto, "In God We Trust." Pete Stark, the only non-theistic member of Congress, was one of the 9 people who said it should not be our motto. And look at what Eric Swalwell said. I'm going to remove my face from this at the bottom here. The 15th Congressional District deserves a member of Congress who is in touch with its people, can work well with others, and can honor our national motto. That's from Eric Swalwell back in 2011. And then guess what? He beat Pete Stark in the primary, and that was it. And that's how Pete Stark got taken out of Congress because of that, which is very interesting. And now Eric Swalwell has joined the Congressional Freethought Caucus. So I just found that to be an interesting side story. This is Jared Huffman's website. And you could see here, the caucus members, there are now 22 members of Congress. Becca Balint, Eric Swalwell being the newest ones at the very bottom there. Those are the members of the Freethought Caucus. There's a bunch of them. It's fantastic because there was a time when you would think no one would want to join this because it's easy. It's so easy for like conservative opponents to use this against them. All 22 of those members are Democrats. And I should say everyone except Jared Huffman is openly religious. I mentioned Becca Balint is Jewish. Eric Swalwell is listed as Protestant, but it doesn't matter. Anyone can support church-state separation, right? So good on them. And the hope is that as this caucus grows, maybe their caucus becomes more influential. Maybe it means the stigma of being an atheist in Congress is being reduced maybe being associated with non-religious people, that stigma goes away. Um, and I mean, keep in mind that the Congressional Prayer Caucus promotes this version of conservative Christianity. It is very large. It has members from both parties. In that sense, the Freethought Caucus has a long way to go. But the fact that it exists and that more members of Congress, including ones who may be in tough races in the future, are willing to join it, I think that says a lot about the fact that it's no longer the taboo that it used to be. And that's a big deal. I mean, 22 people are there. None of them think this is something that's going to hurt them in their reelection bid, this coming November. Maybe that comes as a shock to nobody, but it comes as a shock to me because there was a time not that long ago when being connected to non-religious anything was like the mark of death in any political campaign, certainly at that high of a level. But I found that to be really good news, very exciting, and I hope that caucus continues to grow. That's all I got for you tonight. Thanks all for lasting with me. Any other questions there, Den? No questions, he says. I will just leave you then and say if you have any thoughts, you can always support the channel here. I appreciate any super likes, any support you give on Patreon. Thank you so much to Den for helping me out on an off night. I'll be back next Friday like I normally do. I won't be back this Friday. And if you have any questions, you know where to find me. Have a good weekend, everybody, or early weekend, and I'll see you next week. Thanks all.